Of all the hidden mechanics within SCP Containment Breach, few have intrigued me quite as much as the game's health system. While many of the threats encountered in the facility will instantly kill you, some of them will only damage you instead. If this happens, a variety of effects will occur, such as gimped movement speed, wonky camera bob, and if the wound is bad enough, you will also start bleeding. Once you're bleeding, you only have a few minutes to find a first aid kit or some other healing item before you bleed out and die. But even if you find a first aid kit, its ability and willingness to heal you is quite vague. You're just given a brief description which tells you that you healed without actually giving any details on how much. And in most cases, you're probably still injured after the heal. This whole mechanic is very abstruse, and that's exactly the point. It's meant to add tension to the gameplay, making you feel just as helpless and desperate as you would be if you were in this situation. But ever since I got into this game as a kid, I've always had the desire to find out the why and the how of this health system. How long does it take to bleed out? What causes bleeding? Why do some hits incur bleeding but others don't? Why can some enemies kill the player after a few hits, but others can keep whacking away at them with no noticeable effect? How does the limb damage from the Nine-Tailed Fox's gunshots factor in? Why can the Nine-Tailed Fox randomly kill the player in one shot? How does the ballistic vest affect gunshot damage? Why does healing from a first aid kit feel so random? Is it random? How does the pocket dimensions, and by extension the trench bird's damage over time work? How does SCP-427's slow healing work? All that and more will be answered in this video. Before we begin, I would like to verbally give a mild content warning here. I'm going to be talking about blood, wounds, bleeding out, and the like a lot throughout the explanation, and although SCP Containment Breach is not too gory of a game visually, it does contain gruesome descriptions of wounds that will be shown in the video. I'm not sure if this warning is entirely necessary, but despite me being able to handle most gore just fine, some of the ways you can be hurt in this game do actually make me cringe a little bit, so viewer discretion advised and all that. With that done, let's begin with the basics of how the hidden health values work on their own. That is, what does being injured actually do? The two variables that govern your health are injuries and blood loss. Injuries work similarly to the damage system from Super Smash Bros. 0 means you're at full health, and anything higher means you're hurt. Unlike a typical health bar, there is no set threshold value for injuries that kills you if it's reached. Injuries can go as high as whatever the maximum possible value is, but under normal in-game circumstances, it never goes far beyond 5 or 6. The current injuries value will cause the camera to roll further in the side-to-side movement as you walk, to simulate you having a limp. This effect will grow more intense until you hit 3.0 injuries, where it caps. Additionally, if injuries is greater than 0.5, a movement speed penalty is applied. Unlike the camera bob, this does not have a cap, so if you use cheats to give yourself a huge injuries value, you'll be almost unable to move. Finally, when injuries is higher than 1.0, the player will start bleeding. Injuries cannot kill the player on its own. If that's what it wants, then it's gonna have to call its friend Bloodloss for help. While injuries is above the threshold for bleeding, 1.0, blood loss will increment by the result of the injuries value divided by 300 each tick. Containment Breach runs at 70 ticks per second, with an asterisk. It's not actually a tick system, it's a delta time system where everything is adjusted to make it appear as if it's running at a constant rate, that is, 70 times per second. So it's not truly running 70 times per second, but that fact will not change any of the following info in this video, so I'm just going to pretend that it is running 70 times per second and call them ticks for the sake of simplicity. If you're a programmer, pretend you didn't hear that. Anyway, take whatever value you get from that and multiply it by 70 to see roughly how much blood loss you accumulate each second at that level of injuries. Injuries' effect on blood loss is capped at 3.5. Meaning injuries going any higher than 3.5 will not make you bleed out faster. While bleeding, your vision will periodically become blurry. This effect appears to be slightly lessened if you're crouching, which is a pretty great detail you'll probably never notice. As blood loss rises, it'll cause an increasingly noticeable camera zoom effect, the same effect used when you're staring down SCP-173. Additionally, when blood loss goes higher than 35, a heartbeat sound will start playing, and it'll get faster and louder the closer you are to bleeding out. If blood loss reaches 60, you will be forced to crouch, and the game will display the message, "You are feeling faint from the amount of blood you have lost." Finally, reaching 100 blood loss will kill you. This death does not set a death message, which is a little unusual. There are some deaths in the game that purposefully set the death message to be blank, such as dying to the beast in SCP-860-1 or falling into this shaft in Storage Area 6, but bleeding out doesn't update the death message at all. The reason for this is that some enemies in the game will set a death message upon damaging you. That way, if you bleed out as a result of their damage, the death message will mention them as the cause of your death. This is most interesting with the Nine-Tailed Fox, who have two different death messages, one for if their gunshots directly kill you, and another for if you bleed out from a gunshot. Still, damage sources setting a death message like that is the exception rather than the rule. Most damage sources don't set death messages at all, so bleeding out from their damage results in no death message appearing. I think there could have been a default bleed out death message here that only appears if one wasn't already set, but I digress. Now, how long does it take to bleed out? Since that depends on your injuries value, we can use a fairly simple formula. 100, the blood loss level that kills you, divided by injuries over 300, which, as stated before, is the value added to blood loss each tick. In this case, injuries must be between 1.0 exclusive and 3.5 inclusive. The result is the approximate number of ticks that must pass before you bleed out. You can divide the result by 70 to get the number of seconds, and divide that by 60 to get the number of minutes. At 1.1 injuries, just over the threshold, it takes about 6.5 minutes to bleed out. At 2.5 injuries, what the game considers severe wounds, it takes 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and at 3.5 injuries, the fastest possible bleed out time, it takes just over 2 minutes. So yeah, once you're hurt, you better get a move on to find a heal, because you don't have much time. If injuries is healed back below 1.0, blood loss will freeze wherever it is, and if you were to get hurt again, it'll pick up where it left off. However, most healing items in this game will also heal blood loss in addition to injuries, so it's unlikely to work like that in standard gameplay. As long as blood loss is high enough, the camera zoom, heartbeat sound, and forced crouch effects will still apply even if you're not actually losing blood. Now for the visual effect of dripping blood. If blood loss is higher than 0, there is an injuries in 200 chance each frame to play a drip sound and leave a decal of a drop of blood on the floor wherever you're standing. As you can surmise, the rate of blood drops increases with injuries, and this is capped at 4.0 injuries. The size of the blood drips is also impacted by injuries, and this is capped at 3.0 injuries. Basically, the higher your injuries, the more commonly you leave blood on the floor, and the larger the drops of blood are. This blood drop system has a glaring oversight that can easily mislead you when playing. The code that causes the blood dripping is wrapped in a check for blood loss being higher than 0. This check should also look for injuries being higher than 1, since that's when the player is able to bleed, but it doesn't. The result of this is that it's possible to leave blood drops without actually bleeding, since your injuries isn't high enough to bleed. But since your blood loss is higher than 0, the game runs the blood drip code anyway. So if you've ever had a first aid kit tell you that you stopped the bleeding, only for you to continue leaving blood on the floor, now you know why. Be assured that those blood drips are fake, and you will be okay. On that note, let's get into how healing works, since that's the most helpful thing to know about this system. Since injuries runs in reverse compared to a standard health bar, healing is accomplished by subtracting a value from injuries, and the same applies to blood loss. However, all healing and damage values will always be shown as positive in this video for the sake of clarity. There are a total of 11 healing items in the game, and each one of them has a different way of healing the player. Let's take a look at them. Starting with the first aid kit, and things are already weird. Upon the item's use, it heals your blood loss by a random amount between 10 and 20. Then, it checks if your injuries are at 2.5 or higher, and if they are, it heals them by a random amount between 0.3 and 0.7, and displays the wounds were way too severe to stop the bleeding completely. This heal is unable to take you below 2.5 injuries, even if you use a second first aid kit. So if you're too injured, the standard first aid kit literally cannot help you, aside from granting you extra bleed out time. If your injuries are below 2.5 but higher than 1.0, it heals you by a range of 0.5 to 1. If injuries didn't fall below 1.0 from the heal, display you bandaged the wounds but were unable to stop the bleeding completely. Otherwise, display you managed to stop the bleeding. If injuries is less than 1 but higher than 0.5, set it to 0.5 and display you took a painkiller, easing the pain slightly. Finally, if injuries is less than or equal to 0.5, set it to 0.5 and display you took a painkiller, but it still hurts to walk. This means that first aid kits are unable to heal you past 0.5 injuries. In fact, you may have already noticed that they're a little too adamant about keeping you at 0.5. Because injuries is set to 0.5 whether you're above or below that value, this means that using a first aid kit at high health will actually damage you. I wish I had the creative ability to make this up. How the hell did this make it in? This can even happen if you're at 0 injuries, because you can still use a medkit as long as either injuries or blood loss is higher than 0. Doing this will heal your blood loss, but it causes you to take damage! This game is so weird. I love it. So, the moral of the story is, don't use standard first aid kits. Do yourself a favor and put them through SCP-914 on Fine. This creates a small first aid kit, which is so much better in every way. Using a small first aid kit heals injuries by 2 every time, guaranteed, no strings attached. This heal has no cap, so you can actually get back to full health with this one. In addition, blood loss is always completely reset to 0. So even if the 2 injuries heal isn't enough to stop bleeding, you're at least given a lot of extra time to find another medkit. The small first aid kit can show 3 different messages. If injuries is still higher than 1 after the heal, display you bandaged the wounds and took a painkiller but were unable to stop the bleeding. If injuries fell under 1 but is still higher than 0, display you bandaged the wounds and took a painkiller but you still feel sore. And if injuries reached 0, display you bandaged the wounds and took a painkiller. You feel fine. Interesting how small first aid kits have you use both bandages and a painkiller, while the standard first aid kit only lets you use one or the other. Anyway, the small first aid kit is easily the best healing item in the game for its reliability and availability. The other strong healing items don't appear until the entrance zone, while small first aid kits are available from the moment SCP-914 is accessible. That said, the remaining healing items still exist, so let's cover them. Up next is an item you may or may not know exists: blue first aid kits. You get these for putting the standard variety through 914 on the 1-to-1 setting. Blue first aid kits will run the standard first aid kit healing process, warts and all, and then they will apply one of 6 additional effects, chosen at random. One of these effects is a full heal, resetting injuries and blood loss to 0, along with the message, you bandaged the wounds, the bleeding stopped completely, and you feel fine. However, using this item is risky since the other effects can cause more harm or even kill you. For example, it can also set injuries to 3.5, with the message, you bandaged the wounds and blood started pouring heavily through the bandages. Another effect grants the Superman buff, which eventually kills you. So this isn't a great choice for a healing item, but it's at least there. To summarize, blue first aid kits have a 1 in 6 chance of fully healing you, but also a 1 in 6 chance of setting injuries to 3.5. On a similar note, the strange bottle obtained from putting a first aid kit through 914 on Very Fine can also either heal or harm you at random. Using the item gives you a 1 in 5 chance for a full heal with the message, your wounds are healing up rapidly. It also has a 1 in 5 chance of healing injuries by a range of 0.5 to 3.5, and blood loss by 10 to 100, accompanied by, you feel much better. And one more 1 in 5 effect will blur your vision along with the message, you feel nauseated, but in the process, it'll reset blood loss to 0. Strange. However, it also has a 1 in 5 chance of setting injuries to 3.5 with the message, you started bleeding heavily. Before we move on, the strange bottle actually has one more obscure way of damaging you. One of its random effects is to teleport you into SCP-106's pocket dimension, but if you're inside one of the ending zones, Gate A or B, or inside the SCP-1499 dimension, this effect is replaced with a very similar effect to the other damage effect, except this one sets injuries to 2.5 instead of 3.5. Strange. I thought this was noteworthy because it might just be the most obscure item behavior in the entire game. Right up with SCP-294 drinks being able to shake the camera. Up next is SCP-420-J, which heals injuries by 0.5 upon use. It does not heal blood loss whatsoever, so if you use a 420-J to stop bleeding, do note that blood loss is only being paused, and taking damage again will cause it to pick up where it left off. In that way, the kind of inverse healing item to 420-J is the bottle of eye drops after having gone through SCP-914 on Fine. Using these will not only give you a better blink buff than the standard revision eye drops, but it also heals blood loss by 1! Then we have SCP-427, obtained by putting an SCP-500 pill through 914 on Fine. Opening the locket will heal injuries by about 0.035 per second, and blood loss by about 0.07 per second. If injuries is higher than 1, however, blood loss will not be healed, but it will remain fixed where it is until injuries falls far enough. No need to worry about bleeding out with the locket open. Of course, using 427 is not without its risks. Continuous exposure will turn you into a giant flesh monster, which, in-game, just kills you. Having 427 open will increment a timer, and when this timer reaches 6 minutes, you're done for. There will be messages and strange noises before the 6-minute mark, but once you see this message and start leaving that weird substance on the floor, closing the locket will no longer stop the timer, and the 7-minute mark is when you're killed. The timer is cumulative and cannot be reset, so you only get 6 total minutes of use from 427 before you'll have to seek other healing options. Now here we have some special folks. Syringes are mostly intended for buffing stamina, however, they will also heal you, and damage you simultaneously. Upon use, they set a value to something called the heal timer. While heal timer is positive, injuries is healed by about 0.035 per second, same as 427, while blood loss is increased by about 0.36 per second. The default syringes you find in the— wait a second, increased? That's right. You lose blood from this, even if you're not actually bleeding. The default syringes you find in the medical bay give you 30 seconds of heal timer. Putting a syringe in 914 on Fine changes it to 20 to 40 seconds of heal timer, and Very Fine turns the syringe into something similar to the strange bottle and blue first aid kit. It has 3 random effects, and one of them is to act like the other 2 syringes, but with 40 to 60 seconds of heal timer being set. The other 2 effects don't set a heal timer, so we don't care about those. The higher heal timer values can actually be detrimental, since blood loss is accumulating during that time. Yes, the forced crouch will still happen at 60 blood loss, and yes, reaching 100 blood loss will kill you. This means it's possible to die from blood loss without actually bleeding. Incredible. If this was intentional, it's very weird and a bit evil to secretly accumulate blood loss with no indication given to the player. It makes a bit of sense since poking yourself with a syringe would naturally open up a tiny wound for a while, but would it cause you to lose this much blood? Furthermore, no blood drops are visible during the heal timer's countdown, so there's no way for the player to know they're losing blood here. Typically, this won't matter since there are only 2 syringes per playthrough, and you mostly care about their stamina buff more than their healing/harming ability. Still, the fact that they can cause harm is something you should be aware of. The final healing item is any drink from SCP-294 that was given the ability to heal you. There's not much point in me going through every drink that can heal you, since you can just scroll through the list on scp294.ini and see their heal values for yourself. If you want more info about SCP-294's mechanics, see my previous video. The only thing left to cover in regards to healing is that SCP-500 pills used to fully heal you upon use, but one of the last updates to the game removed that effect. Not just to make the newly introduced SCP-427 actually useful, but also to make it more accurate to the original SCP article, which never mentioned that the pills can heal wounds, only that they would cure diseases or similar ailments, which is exactly what SCP-500 now does in Containment Breach. If you're wondering, it cures SCP-008's infection, the death timer given by SCP-294 drinks, any of SCP-1025's diseases, and any stamina debuffs you may have. Specifically debuffs. If it's a buff, it won't remove it. And that is how healing works. The key takeaway is to always, always, always turn first aid kits into small first aid kits and use those to heal whenever you need it. You will thank me later. Anyway, now it's time to explain all the things that cause the damage you're trying to heal. Fortunately, most of this is a lot more straightforward, but before we go through all the damage values, there's one thing that's a little unclear about how enemies that damage you work. For a few of these enemies, being hit by them enough times eventually kills you. But what causes this? Injuries cannot kill you on its own, and they're not damaging your blood loss since otherwise you'd notice the forced crouch effect. The answer is simpler than I expected. It turns out that some enemies will hit you, inflict damage, and then check to see if your injuries value is above a certain threshold. If it is, then this hit from the enemy will kill you. So yeah, for a few particular enemies, injuries does act as a standard health bar with a set breakpoint that kills you. The exact breakpoint value differs from enemy to enemy, and that's assuming the enemy even has one, which not every enemy does. I'll be calling this breakpoint the kill threshold going forward. With that cleared up, let's get to the stats. The earliest encounterable enemy that damages is SCP-939, which deals a random amount of damage between 1.5 and 2.5. Being hit by one of these guys is all but guaranteed to cause bleeding. I say all but guaranteed because there's actually an interesting addition to the damage mechanic here. If you're wearing a ballistic vest, then their damage is reduced. A normal ballistic vest subtracts 0.5 from the damage, and a heavy ballistic vest subtracts 1 from the damage. Aside from gunshots, this is the only damage source to have its damage reduced by the ballistic vest. Perhaps the developers were going to add this to all damage sources, but never got around to it for whatever reason. Anyway, 939's kill threshold is 4 injuries. If one of their bites takes you higher than that, you're done. SCP-205 will inflict 0.4 to 0.8 damage at random moments upon entering the chamber with the lamps. This is supposed to represent the 3 shadow demons beating you to death. Their kill threshold is 5 injuries. The SCP-1499-1 instances in the dimension deal 0.75 to 1.5 damage per hit, and their kill threshold is quite high at 10 injuries. You can take quite a beating from them before succumbing to the pain, but you can also do better, as we'll see shortly. Going through the rest of the damage sources in the light containment zone, we have SCP-970 dealing 0.3 damage upon looping through it 5 times. This will always occur on the 5th loop, and after that it will not damage you any further. This will barely be noticeable since your movement speed isn't impacted until 0.5 injuries, so all you can see is the increased camera roll range. Unless, of course, you were lightly damaged by something else earlier. SCP-1123 will set your injuries to 1.0 after touching it. Then upon opening this door in its flashback event, injuries will be set to 1.5, and blood loss will be set to 70, forcing you to crouch. Once the flashback event is done, injuries and blood loss will be reset to whatever they were before you touched 1123. So if you were at full health before the event, you'll be at full health at the end. And if you were damaged before the event, you will remain damaged afterwards. But 1123 is at least kind enough to heal you temporarily for the flashback. Similarly, vomiting from an SCP-294 drink, a very fine syringe, or SCP-895 will set injuries and blood loss to 1.5 and 70 respectively, to create the effect of you staggering on the floor weakened. This will only last around 10 seconds before the values reset to whatever they were before you threw up. These latter two don't really damage you, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway, because it is interesting to see how the game uses its own health system for other purposes. Though, admittedly, it is a bit strange that you bleed for a while after vomiting. It gives the impression that you've been harmed by the purge, but really, you'll be fine in a couple of seconds. Unless you threw up from SCP-895, then you're definitely dead. Moving on to SCP-012, this evil scrap of paper inflicts 0.5 damage, then sets injuries to 1.5, then inflicts 0.3, 0.5, and finally 0.8 damage throughout the event for a total of 3.1 damage. Each hit of damage usually corresponds to a message on the screen, except for the second to last instance of damage, which is applied silently. This has no kill threshold since the player's death is based on the event's timer and not your injuries. If you move away right at the end, you'll be able to survive, albeit with severe wounds. Nothing a small medkit can't patch up. I find it kind of strange how the second instance of damage sets the injuries value rather than change it like the others do. The game likes to do that a lot, and I'm not really sure why. Oh well, let's move on to SCP-1162, which deals a whopping 5 damage if you use it without any items in your inventory. That's the highest amount of damage anything deals in the whole game, Which makes sense considering that it steals one of your organs. For some reason, this thing's kill threshold is 15 injuries, which means you can use it like this 3 times before you die. I guess it's not that damaging after all? On top of this, the SCP has a unique death message that you can only see if you die to it this way. A very strange design choice, but okay. Finally, putting yourself through SCP-914 on course will set injuries to 4.0. At least it's better than rough, which just insta-kills. Up next are the denizens of the Heavy Containment Zone. The 2 instances of SCP-049-2 deal 0.4 to 1 damage each hit. Strangely, they do not have a kill threshold, which means you can sit there and take hundreds of repeated blows without dying. That is, until Bloodloss catches up. In this footage, they managed to get me over 100 injuries, and I'm sure I could have gone higher if I let them hit me for longer. At that level of injuries, I was basically unable to move out of their attack range, especially when the forced crouch kicked in. What's weirder is how they have a death message, which, thanks to their lack of a kill threshold, only appears if you bleed out as a result of their attacks. Why they're like this, I don't know, but while we're in SCP-049's chamber, I may as well mention that dying to 049 while in his chamber triggers this special scene where the nine-tailed fox shoot you to death. During this scene, your injuries are set to 2.0. Neat! When hostile, the 4 SCP-966s deal 0.5 to 1 damage per hit, and they too lack a kill threshold. Not only that, they lack a death message altogether. This shows that they're just supposed to weaken you to make you an easier target for the other threats, which is reinforced by the fact that their attacks are much slower than any other melee-based enemy. I guess the zombies are only supposed to weaken you too, but I don't know, their missing kill threshold felt more like an oversight to me. SCP-035 has 2 different things that deal damage, the chamber itself and the tentacle-like growths. Standing inside the chamber will slowly increase injuries by a rate of about 0.015 per second. Just a quick disclaimer, all the rates I mention are only estimates based on quick math, as well as eyeballing the damage increase frame by frame. It's possible that the rates aren't exact, but they are at least very close. Anyway, the tentacle growths deal 1 to 1.5 damage each hit and have a kill threshold of 3. Under normal circumstances. If you have the patience to lug the hazmat suit from SCP-008's chamber all the way to 035's chamber, wearing it will boost your defense against both of these damage sources. The rate of damage from standing in the chamber is cut in half, down to about 0.0074 injuries per second, and the tentacles' damage is reduced to 0 to 0.5 per hit. Their kill threshold is also eliminated entirely, meaning they cannot kill you at all with the hazmat suit on. They can still damage you a lot if you let them, so don't let them. Before we move on, I wanted to mention something cool I learned while recording this. Most players never stay in 035's chamber for very long, and for good reason. But if you choose to stay in there for about 40 seconds, the whispering sounds in the room become extremely distorted, and almost deafeningly loud. It might sound like a bug, but it's not. That distortion is an intended part of one of the sound effects. This is very cool and accurate to the SCP, and I had no idea this could happen until I recorded this footage. The more you know. Speaking of the more you know, I doubt most of you knew that SCP-008 is able to damage the player. If 173 breaks through the glass while you're in the chamber, and you don't have a hazmat suit on, one of the shards of glass hits your arm, which infects you with SCP-008 and also deals 0.1 damage. It's a puny amount of damage, so you won't notice it whatsoever. The more important thing is that you're infected, which will kill you after this value up here reaches 90. Afterwards, a scene of a zombified D9341 eating a poor scientist will play, during which your injuries is set to 2.5. That is 0.5 injuries higher than what the value is during the 049 zombie death scene. Remember that, it will be on the test. That leaves us with SCP-106, and more accurately his pocket dimension, which is probably the most common way to take damage in the game. First of all, 106 catching you doesn't inflict any damage, despite how it seems. Or at least, no damage is dealt at that moment. You will take 0.5 damage upon the actual teleport to the pocket dimension, which you have this function to thank for. So yeah, it's not really 106 dealing this damage, especially because falling into the sinkhole in the light containment zone calls the same function and thus inflicts the same initial damage, even though 106 himself wasn't involved. But where am I going with this? Well, remember that there is a third way to enter the pocket dimension, and that's the strange bottle. The strange bottle does not call move to pocket dimension, which means that the initial 0.5 damage is not dealt if this was your method of arrival. I swear, this game only gets more messed up the more I analyze it. Anyway, being inside the pocket dimension slowly damages you at a rate of about 0.0036 per second. Since injuries applies a speed penalty when above 0.5, this means the longer you spend in the pocket dimension, the slower you'll be moving through it. If the strange bottle took you here, you'll at least get more time to enjoy normal speed, and more time before bleeding will start. Upon entering the throne room, another gradual damage effect is applied, this one at a rate of about 0.0175 per second. This stacks on top of the base pocket dimension damage for a total rate of 0.021 injuries per second. You do not want to linger in this room with that kind of damage afoot. Be sure to crouch as soon as possible in order to enter the trench. That said, the trench has its own damage source in the form of the plane. Unfortunately, I can't give a simple value for this one because the damage depends on the plane's distance from the player, which is constantly changing. The formula for damage each tick, reminder that there are 70 ticks in 1 second, is 8.0 minus the plane's current distance from the player times 0.0003. Remember that this is stacked on top of the base pocket dimension damage. In short, the rate of damage increases as it flies straight overhead, then decreases as it flies away. It's best to stay under the boards when it's right overhead, then make a break for the next set of boards as it flies away. Also, note that camera rotation is not a factor in the damage formula, meaning that repeatedly turning your view away from the plane has no effect on the damage you take. Constantly turning your camera like that could actually be a detriment to getting out of the trench since your direction of movement is being disrupted, so it's best to keep the camera still and proceed forward as quickly as you can. Alright, with the pocket dimension done, all that's left is the damage sources in the entrance zone. It may surprise you, as it did me, that SCP-066 can deal 0.3 to 0.5 damage whenever it smashes the floor and you're close enough to it. There is no kill threshold. It seems to be unable to smash the floor on the lower level of the cafeteria, where you find 066 most often, so this makes it a kind of rare occurrence. While I'm here, did you know that while SCP-066 sits still, its eyes will turn to look at you? Because I didn't until I recorded this footage. Also, I may as well mention that SCP-294 drinks can damage you if they're set to do so. The only thing noteworthy about them is how they're the only damage source capable of damaging your blood loss, increasing it by a certain value. Again, see scp-294.ini for the exact values each drink can have, and feel free to edit them while you're there. Then there's the victim of SCP-008 in the medical bay. His damage is the same as SCP-049-2, complete with no kill threshold, but this guy has the bonus effect of infecting you with SCP-008. The infection timer increases by 1 for every hit you take, so stay far away. Now's a good time to mention that SCP-427 can actually heal the 008 infection, albeit at a slow rate. If you get hit by the victim and happen to have 427, open it right away before the infection has a chance to build up. Also, I've already been over how the blue first aid kit and the strange bottle are able to damage you in the healing section, but I'll mention it again here since it is a damage source, so it fits in the list with the others. For the exact damage values, refer to the healing section of the video. With that covered, I have officially run out of ways to avoid talking about the nine-tailed fox, and how deranged the gunshot damage mechanics are. Prepare yourself, this is gonna get a little crazy. Gunshots can come from either facility guards, the helicopters in the ending zones, or most commonly, the mobile task force, aka Nine-Tailed Fox. Some gunshots are set to insta-kill you, like the ones from the guards throughout the intro sequence, and this one shortly after the intro, but the ones that damage you are what we're interested in. The logic for the bullet's travel is extremely simple. It's little more than an RNG call with the probability of the bullet hitting the player dependent on their distance from the enemy. At least that's how it is for the Nine-Tailed Fox. The helicopters and guards use different probabilities, but that's not super important. If the bullet hits the player, one of 3 switch case statements are run depending on if the player has no ballistic vest on, the normal ballistic vest on, or the heavy ballistic vest on. Let's start with no ballistic vest. The switch case, or select case in Blitz Basic, whatever, generates a random number that decides where on the player the bullet will hit. 4 of the 5 outcomes will deal 0.8 to 1.2 damage per shot, but one of the outcomes will deal 2.5 to 4.5 damage, the second highest amount of damage anything deals in the game, behind SCP-1162. Strangely, this outcome displays that you were hit in the right shoulder, even though one of the previous outcomes uses that same message. I assume this is an oversight, and they meant to say that the bullet hits your torso or something instead. Finally, one of the outcomes will just kill you with no message. There is no kill threshold for bullets without a ballistic vest on, so this is what decides whether a bullet kills you instead. To summarize, without a ballistic vest on, each bullet has a 1 in 6 chance of killing you, a 1 in 6 chance of dealing 2.5 to 4.5 damage, and a 4 in 6 chance of dealing 0.8 to 1.2 damage. With a normal ballistic vest equipped, this switch case is called, which has a 5 in 8 chance of dealing 0.1 to 0.5 damage, and also depleting your stamina bar. Otherwise, there's a 2 in 8 chance of dealing 0.8 to 1.2 just like before, and a 1 in 8 chance of dealing 1.2 to 1.5 damage and depleting stamina. Notably, the chance to kill is not included in this switch case, meaning that wearing a ballistic vest guarantees that the first few bullets you take will not kill you. However, bullets can still kill you after you sustain enough damage. How come? Well, wearing either ballistic vest introduces a kind of kill threshold of 5 injuries, though a 1 in 3 chance has to succeed before the bullet kills the player. Plus, reaching 5 injuries from gunshots actually requires some RNG of its own, more on that shortly. Last up is the heavy ballistic vest switch case. Each shot has a 1 in 10 chance of dealing 0.8 to 1.1 damage and reducing stamina by 1. The maximum stamina with the vest on is 60. Otherwise, deal only 0.1 to 0.5 damage with no extra effect. This kicks the crap out of the normal ballistic vest and will let you take bullets like a champ. You still don't want to be in their gunfire for long because injuries hurt, but you're much more likely to survive longer exposure to gunfire if you have this thing on. In fact, you might be a bit too likely. Hang on, what's going on here? I don't have God mode on in this footage, because gunshots will never actually hit you if you have God mode on, which is a property that only applies to this particular damage source. Anyway, how am I surviving for this long? Why is my injuries frozen in place? That's because I left out a crucial piece of info. When taking damage from a gunshot, your injuries cannot go higher than 4. Upon being shot, the damage will be inflicted as normal, but then the game will reduce injuries to 4 if it ended up higher than 4 after the damage. This also means that if your injuries were higher than 4 from something else, being shot will heal you. What is this game? This can also occur with any other damage source that sets the injuries value. If your injuries was higher than that value, you'll be healed to that value instead. Look man, I don't know, I'm just the messenger. But wait a second. The kill threshold put in place by wearing a ballistic vest is 5. So how are the bullets killing you if the damage cap is lower than the threshold? Well, remember that the bullet is able to inflict damage before the cap takes effect and undoes it. And since the kill threshold check comes between the damage and the cap enforcement, this means it's possible for the player to die if the bullet inflicts enough damage to reach 5 injuries in a single hit, before the cap would bring injuries back down to 4. And you still need to succeed that 1 in 3 chance for the player to die. Assuming injuries is at 4, the bullet needs to deal at least 1.0 damage to be able to kill. The normal ballistic vest allows this for 3 out of 8 possible outcomes. But even then, 2 of the 8 outcomes don't guarantee that the bullet's damage is 1.0 or higher, so the outcomes can still fail to reach 5 injuries. With the heavy ballistic vest, the bullet must succeed the 1 in 10 chance for the 0.8 to 1.1 damage in order to have a shot at killing the player. Neither of these outcomes guarantee enough damage to roll the 1 in 3 chance, which is why I was able to take so many bullets in a row here. There are 3 total layers of RNG a bullet must get through before the player dies whilst having a vest equipped. Let me do my best to summarize. In order for a bullet to kill a player who has a ballistic vest equipped and an injuries value of 4, the bullet must first roll an outcome with a damage range that reaches 1.0 or higher. Second, the damage value that is output from the damage range must be 1.0 or higher. The normal ballistic vest has a 1 in 8 outcome that guarantees this. Third and finally, the bullet must succeed a 1 in 3 chance, and if all of that occurs, The bullet kills the player. So, just one question. What in the flying So overall, the gunshot damage is a bunch of BS mixed with pancake batter and moss. Just bring a heavy ballistic vest, a couple of first aid kits, and the 2 quarters from the wallet into the entrance zone, and you'll be as ready as you can be for the Nine-Tailed Fox. And that is the health system of SCP Containment Breach. It's a wonky, fricked up mess of a system that shouldn't work as well as it does, but alas, it functions decently. As a whole, I actually kinda like this health system. It's a good way to add tension to the gameplay as you limp your way to a medkit, barely clinging to life, and you can look back to see the trail of blood you've left behind. I really do enjoy the idea and some of the execution of what the developers made here. Despite that, I wouldn't blame you if you expressed disdain for this health system. It can definitely be a pain, quite literally, to deal with. The bleed-out timer is surprisingly short, and the scant number of healing items in the early to mid-game doesn't help matters. Even if you have a first aid kit, using it feels like taking a shot in the dark. And sometimes that shot can ricochet off of 2 walls, fly back at you, and damage you by 0.5 injuries. Because of all this, many players just reload a save whenever they take damage so they can avoid the health system entirely. You can call that cheating all you want to, but the save system is a part of Containment Breach's lore for a reason. Additionally, the health system enables a chance to soft-lock your playthrough if you save while bleeding, since you might not have enough time to reach a healing item after the point you saved. And how would you know? Neither injuries nor blood loss is visible to you in normal gameplay. The visual effects / debuffs are all you have to go off of, and they don't tell you very much. Overall, I think this health system was a good idea, but it definitely could have used some tweaks. Give the player more time before they bleed out, give a few more medkits early game, and while you're at it, prevent the player from saving if their blood loss is too high. Do that, and I think the health system would have been received better on the whole. This video has been a long time coming. I've wanted to know how this health system worked ever since I was obsessed with this game as a kid, and I've also wanted to make this very video since I found out that Containment Breach is open source and I can just go look at how it works with my small amount of programming knowledge. So it feels amazing to finally be making the video after all this time. Going in, I already knew the health system was weird, but after finding out that medkits can damage you, gunshots can heal you, you can bleed without actually bleeding in 2 different ways, and bullets have to pass through the 9 circles of RNG hell before they're allowed to kill you, I've come to the conclusion that this health system is absolutely unhinged. But hey, it just works. And I really hope you enjoyed learning about how it works as much as I did. Furthermore, I must thank you all for the amazing reception to the SCP-294 video. These technical breakdown type videos are something I've wanted to make for a very long time, so to have the first one I released receive that much positive attention is extremely motivating. Feel free to let me know if there's any mechanic in SCP Containment Breach you want me to cover in a future video. You can absolutely expect Containment Breach content as a mainstay on this channel, although I will still upload a non-Containment Breach video from time to time, as I don't want to be locked to only one game for my entire future content. With that said, thank you all for watching, if you did, and as always, I will see you all in the future.